one thing I should have done at the very opening, just to make mention the fact that, you know, SANS and ARC have formed kind of, where you have a collaboration between the two of us. And just to explain the reason for that, you know, we see a lot more IT, OT type of integration. SANS has always been a training organization we respect very much, and particularly from the IT side. So we've been doing things together. So one thing is they're a training organization, we're an analyst group. Very often we get asked, you know, after we tell people what their problems are, then they say, well, how do I solve it? Get some training. And so it's one way to reference that, as well as other organizations. We don't just exclusively recommend them. But also we've tried to do some, we're trying, though, we've just been doing this for a while, to do more joint research and things like that together on surveys and things like that. So with that said, now what I want to do is, Doug just kind of, the reason I had Doug go first is Doug was talking a lot about threats and vulnerabilities and things like that. What I want to talk about is more what we see companies doing. And we did a recent survey. This is actually an update. We've done this survey several times now. Not exactly the same survey, but a lot of the questions are very, very similar. And we look more into what companies are doing to address their cybersecurity issues. Not so much, we have questions in there, what are you concerned about, but Doug's kind of addressed that, so I'm going to address what are they doing. So, boy, this is really, there we go. Now, before I do that, and this might seem, it's not a sales pitch, okay, but it may seem like one. It's just that I want to give you context for what we were trying to get in our survey. And this is a model that we've used at ARC. We call it our Industrial Cybersecurity Maturity Model. It's not the kind of maturity model that you're used to. What it is we deal with a lot of companies, and we've found many, many managers are frustrated with cybersecurity. You know, a lot of managers say, I'm used to, you know, once I accept that there's a problem, okay, I get the money, I pay the money, it should be solved. And then what happens is the next day somebody comes back and asks for more money and more money and more money. And they see it as playing whack-a-mole and stuff. And in a lot of cases, these are people that really aren't cybersecurity experts, don't want to be cybersecurity experts. They simply want to be able to manage their business. So we put this together as a way to kind of simplify cybersecurity for them, to give them something to use as to actually balance kind of their investments with their a willingness to accept risks and how much they believe they're at risk. So it's just a model that goes from left to right, and it starts off by securing the devices and then defending trying to keep malware out of their systems. That's what I call defend. And then for any malware that gets in, there's steps that you can take to contain it. Once you have it contained, you still have to monitor to see what's in there. And then the last thing is to actively manage cybersecurity. And as you go up those steps, you're adding another layer of security. And I don't mean it in the terms of defense in depth, though maybe it is a defense in depth. But it's actually adding additional layers of things to say, I still don't trust it. I always make the analogy with your home, protecting your home. I went through this. We actually were burglarized one time. This was many years ago, and immediately I went out and bought a very sophisticated home security system. Absolute waste of time, waste of money, because we never used it. Nobody ever locked the doors, so it was useless. So I always say to somebody, if they're worried about their home, first thing to do is lock your doors. And maybe that's enough for you. It depends where you live. We happen to have lived in a very safe country, but it didn't work. I'm safe out in the country. We live in a safe country too, but it was out in the country. But anyhow, so we always say, you know, first thing, do the basic things first, and if you're happy with that, then that's enough for you. If not, then add some more security. Buy the security system. If you're really concerned, buy a safe and put it in your house. You know, it's all got to do with how concerned you are. So this model we use to help people do that. And for each of the steps, we have kind of technologies that you can use to accomplish that goal. And then the more important thing, in a way, or equally important, is at the top you see one thing we find, and I think everybody here knows one of the big issues, at least we think in cybersecurity, is the lack of resources. You know, people buy systems, they can't maintain them, they can't use the information that comes from them, so in a way those investments are kind of wasted. So we have at the very top something that kind of says, if you invest in those technologies, you better have these kind of resources in place to be able to maintain them and get value out of them. And that's what we really call cybersecurity maturity, is it's the maturity of the organization to use the technologies. If you don't have the maturity, don't waste your money. And so it's one of those issues. So given that as the framework, what we do, what we have a lot of research we've done, and it's been same for over many, many years. We see that we go out and we kind of say, where are people? So relative to this model, you might say the ideal program would be completely at the right. Now, that's partially true. If you have some operation that you could have disruption, you make bolts, you know, probably that's not one you want to invest in and have 10 people on a staff do an active cybersecurity defense. You're probably happy, okay, if I have a problem, I have a problem, okay? So you might be happy with a lower level. And what we see, though, is that most companies, if you see there, we go through the ideal program might be to the right. It probably is for like a refinery or for something like that. But what we actually see in the world is if you see that one arrow there that says where the actual technology investments are, most people have invested probably pretty much in the first 3 steps. A lot of companies have. You know, I hear a lot about companies aren't doing stuff. The ones I know, we do deal with a lot of large companies. They've pretty much invested in defensive technologies. You know, they have firewalls, they have anti-malware software, a lot of them have whitelisting and things like that. So they're pretty much up through the first 3 steps. Now they're starting to get invested in anomaly and breach detection type of stuff. But in general, they're about there. So you see there's kind of a gap between where they are and where they should be. We call that the technology gap. More importantly, if you say, where are your resources to utilize and maintain that technology, you'll see where that one is. It's way to the left of that. So the reality is people probably don't have the technology they could use given their goals. It depends, again, on a company. But even if they also don't even have the people in place to maintain what they have bought, okay? So to us, we focus a lot on those 2 things, the technology gaps and the resource gaps. And that's the context. The reason I went all through this was to give you context. Our survey was focused around answering questions about that. What is the real technology gap? What are the real resource gaps, okay? So with that said, let me now talk about our survey. We just completed it actually it was in December, and we actually just published a report. I think it was the end of January the report was published. And you know, this model, and as I make the point again, the model was really, I kind of stepped on my own slides here. Our model is really to help managers understand their cybersecurity technology and resource gaps. The next step is once we get them to do that, most of them get it real quick. Okay, I see it now, and they can actually go and say, well, here's where I am. And then we help them. And if you just look at the technologies and the people, you can position yourself. And then the next thing is say, okay, what do I do about it? And that's the question. So, but whenever they say, what do I do about it? They might say, oh, Sid, tell me what I should do about it. But they don't really trust Sid. There's a lot of other people that could come in and tell them other things. So they say, what are my peers really doing? And I think you've all seen that. And it's a very rational thing to do. Say, I'm not going to go invest a lot of stuff if my peers aren't doing it. So you want to kind of keep in pace. So again, the purpose of the survey was to try to understand what companies are actually doing, and then we do it by industry and geography and stuff like that. So I thought I got rid of this slide, actually. That's why I stepped on it. But anyhow, so the ones I want to present to you, the survey has a lot of questions, but the 2 I want to focus on are 2 things. How do I address my cybersecurity resource gap? How do I address my cybersecurity technology gap? And I hope those slides are in there. No, they're not. Okay. As you can imagine, when we organize these things, we give a lot of changes. Well, the last ones aren't here, so we'll just wing it. Anyhow, one other comment relative to Doug, who gave a wonderful presentation. I'm a very technical guy, so you're going to be overwhelmed with charts, all right? So we're going to fly through them, but I'm not going to describe every little detail, but I love numbers. That's my nature. But anyhow, the very first question we find, and this is more around the resource gaps, is, you know, most companies, as I mentioned, have a resource problem. Again, I think it's a very well-known thing. The companies lack resources and they lack the expertise. And so the question is, how do I solve that problem? And when we talk to companies, we say, well, first thing you should do is try to get the most you can out of the staff you have, focus them on the right tasks, make sure they have tools to help them maintain and do their security management tasks. There's a lot of mundane things that have to be done. There's no reason you can't automate that. But usually, even when they do that, they say, we still don't have the resources. And oftentimes, it's an expertise issue. So one of the questions that one strategy to address that is a lot of companies will have central groups, corporate groups. It could be a corporate group in a security operations center. It could be just people spread across the company. But they say we're going to leverage other resources in our company outside of the plant. So what this survey was, this question was asking about, how do you use local resources? What do you have local? And by local, I defined it to be within the plant. And how do you use corporate resources? And if you look, the green on this chart, I believe, is what it's on the left is all different kinds of tasks like setting policy, maintaining technology, selecting technology, and so on. And on the right, the green is central, the right is plant. And I guess it's not surprising, but most companies still use their plant people, and what they use them for is to do things that have to be done in a plant. You know, maintaining technology, doing patches, implementing technology and stuff like that. They use corporate groups, even though your survey showed it, I think, as well, was they tend to set policy. So set policy, maybe have standards for what kind of technologies used across the corporation and stuff like that. The important thing is, I remember from my notes, though these slides are a little different, the big thing, I think, is in the middle. One thing we're seeing an awful lot now is this sharing of responsibilities, where they're saying nobody can I can't just take something and give it to the corporate group. I need to also have the support of the plant. So they put together these teams, and a big reason for that is collaboration and coordination and make sure everybody's doing the same thing or working on a team. Boy, this is... Okay, this is a similar kind of question, but one thing was central groups versus local groups. Another question that was very important to us is IT versus OT, or I would say ICS, OT/ICS. We see a big trend in this way, and it's one of the reasons, again, we're collaborating a lot with SANS and things, is we see more need to integrate in IT people into the security of plants. For both sides. I think the plant people need that expertise. I'm an old engineer. I think I know a lot about, or at least I knew a lot about IT for plants. I mean, I always, if somebody said to me, do you know? I'd say, sure. But I would never have been able to get rid of an incident or investigate an incident or deal with some of the cybersecurity stuff. And I didn't want to. And I never would want to. But there are people in IT that do that, so why wouldn't you want to leverage it? So it's one of those things from an expertise perspective, bringing them in. And on this chart, the green is mostly IT, the yellow is mostly ICS. And if you look at the kinds of things they're doing, again, it kind of, I think it makes sense. And you know, on this survey, we've done this same survey several times, and it's pretty consistent. But we do see a little bit of a shift to where now we see where the yellow is, which is mostly ICS people. And the left, as I think you all know, most people in plants say, I don't want those IT people in my plant. At least I find that a lot. That's shifting. And particularly the blue in the middle, which is the shared again, is growing very nicely. So we do see that as a trend of trying to integrate in more IT people. And this is more just telling you, if you're going to do it, which things would you do? What would you have them do? This is the same kind of a question, but it deals with networking. So I'm not going to bore you with it, but an interesting thing there is if you do look, the yellow in that, the only ones that are much yellow in that picture are really the plant networks and things like that. And that makes sense. They don't want IT people fooling around with networks in plants. But one that surprised me there was even SCADA networks, because I thought SCADA in the world, you know, it's so many external, it's very specialized. So. The next question, so again, we first talked about corporate versus plant, then there's IT versus OT. This is a question that relates to use of third-party external support services, and there's a lot of companies that offer those today. And this question is really, how much do you use those? To what extent do you use that? And everything from, we use them extensively, and again, the things that go top to bottom, I apologize, I'm sure I don't know how much you can read this, I know there's a lot of data. But it was a survey, so there was a lot of data. But it's broken down by what activities do you have external people do, what activities do you have internal people do, or to what extent are you using external services, excuse me. And the green is extensively, the blue is moderately, the yellow is to a minimal extent. And if you go down that chart, what you'll see is, most of the stuff that has to be done on site is being done by internal people. Most companies take the decision of saying, if it's got to be done on site because I have to have some collaboration or coordination with operations, or I need to be there to see it, then I'm going to have my people do it rather than pay service people to stay here all the time. But if you do things like system vulnerability analysis, training, what's that last one? Oh, one that I find interesting is the system event and alert monitoring, because I think that's something that requires expertise that many plants don't have, and so they tend to use external people for that. So we see that growing as well. This was an interesting question, because one question we said is, well, all right, if you use external people, who do you use for what things, okay? And my background, again, is automation person. And, I know a lot of automation companies already have big service businesses, obviously, and they go and support these facilities to keep the automation systems running. Many of them have extended those programs to include cybersecurity services, very naturally, and I think they know their products and they do it well. But, so I thought for sure the natural one, what this is who is your preferred choice for an external service provider? And it was only in that one with the, I'm sorry, I can't, oh, the green, or that's the light blue is the ICS OT equipment suppliers. It's the one in the middle. So you don't see that being used like for system vulnerability assessments. I thought they would do a lot of those, but in reality, most companies are going to cybersecurity, companies who specialize in cybersecurity for ICS. The same thing is true for incident management and recovery, and even system event and alert monitoring. So companies tend not to be using automation companies, which was very surprising to me. They tend to be going to these boutique or companies that do cybersecurity, that are specialists in cybersecurity. I don't want to say any, I know a lot of these companies, I don't want to mention the names because I don't want to be accused of promoting someone up here. But I found that a very interesting finding. Now at the bottom, the one that's a big orange, that had to do with training, and obviously they go to training organizations for that. But even that was surprising to me because a lot of automation companies also try to do things like training of people and stuff. So anyhow, that was the data in this with respect to services, or no, addressing resource gaps. Now I want to talk about addressing technology gaps. And the way I did this, we've done this one for several years, and we just find it an interesting chart. What that chart is on the left, I asked all the people and I say, here's a technology. Like in this one, it had to do with endpoint protection solutions, and there's three kinds there. Traditional anti-malware software with signatures. Next generation anti-malware software, which would be signatureless. And the last one is application whitelisting. All of those we see as endpoint protection technologies. We do market studies, and that's how we classify them. And the left point at the left side of those graphs is what's the extent of use today. And if you look on that, you'll see 70% of the companies say they use anti-malware. Actually, last time we did the survey, it was 90%, which doesn't surprise me. Maybe some have given up now because there's a lot of, I don't want to criticize the software, there's a lot of good features, but the maintenance of the profiles and stuff. Anyhow, so that kind of goes from 70, and then the next middle point is how many, do you plan to use it in 1 year, within the next year? And then the third one is we plan to use within the next 3 years, and it's cumulative, all right? So it's the increment from the left to the right is the ones that said I'm going to use it in a year, and then another increment. So you can see what you see on that is the growth of the adoption of that technology, assuming that comes true, but that's kind of an indication of that. So what you see on that chart is about 70% of the people are using anti-malware, traditional anti-malware. About 50% or 40 to 50% are using application whitelisting today. We've seen a lot of companies, it seems like a natural. There's always been a popular looking thing in the ICS world. We've also seen companies who've kind of tried it and abandoned it because they've had maintenance issues of maintaining that because of updates and things like that. But it looks to me like it's still a very popular technology. Maybe, I don't know how it got to 50, whether it just, when it was at 50 was good, or whether it's gone down to 50, but it looks like it's going to continue to go up. And then the last one is the signatureless, or the next generation anti-malware, which I think is a good idea. You know, one of the big issues is in updating signatures and things like that. Nobody has time to do it. Nobody can shut down operations. If you can find a way to get around that, that's better. There's issues with those technologies too, though. So anyhow, that's the growth of that technology. Another area is network security. And in this one, hopefully this slide, yeah, it does. Okay. Again, the slide sets, I apologize, it's an older version. But what I have on this chart is a variety of different kinds of technologies you can use for firewalls. You know, conventional firewalls, next generation firewalls, ICS firewalls, which by that I mean deep packet inspection for ICS protocol firewalls, as well as unidirectional gateways or data diodes, whichever term you might use for that. And if you look at the way it's broken down, most companies are using conventional and next generation firewalls. And by the way, it's broken down as well for perimeter protection, zone protection, and device protection. So a lot of companies currently today are using next generation firewalls, but if you look at the growth rate of that, it's not that high. You know, I mean, the one, I wish I could read the red there. I can't read it from here, I apologize. The shift, I think, if you look in that one right in that circle, the flat one is conventional firewalls in essence. The ones that are growing are next generation firewalls, which is I think, very expected. The bottom part is darn this thing. The bottom part is ICS, or deep packet inspection firewalls. And I was very pleased to see the growth in that. You know, a lot of people are saying we really need to be able to analyze deep packet-wise, and it means more than deep packets on a next generation firewalls. I'm talking about ones that understand protocols, Modbus and things like that. So those seem to be, while they're low today, the use is growing quite high. Another one, and it's a very new technology, and if you remember when I showed you the chart of our model and where people are technology-wise, and I mentioned they have the defensive technologies, and then a lot of them now looking at what we call anomaly and breach detection, moving ahead into the monitoring, looking and saying, in a way, kind of addressing the issue that Doug had with respect to how long does it take to detect something in your system. The idea of these solutions, in my view at least, is to really be able to continuously monitor and say, is something wrong? There's something funny going on. I'm going to catch it as soon as I can catch it, all right? So the use of that technology today is kind of low, which I don't think should be a surprise. It's an emerging technology. Well, it's a little past emerging now. I think it's now starting to get adoption. But if you can see, the growth rate's very high. And just as a comment, we break that into two things. We decided to define the words anomaly and breach individually. Breach detection are solutions that are looking at compromises within an endpoint, and it can be with an agent or it can be looking from the outside. And the other one, the anomaly detection, or anomalous message detection is the way we formally kind of say it, is really looking at the message flow within networks, which is what you see in a lot of solutions out there today. And both of them have high growth. Another kind of tool, and this has to do with the resource issues really, is cybersecurity management tools. Almost every company, if you look at them, like that's what this chart's showing. What I have on here is, to maintain your cybersecurity, you need to have tools to deal with these alerts and the vulnerabilities. You know, you get the alerts, people are overwhelmed with, how do I manage that? How do I decide whether it's important to me or not? There's one issue, that's a big issue. You know, you have to know what you have, the asset, you have to have a good asset inventory, you have to know what you have, and then match that with what the vulnerability is. But then, once you even know you have a vulnerability, you then still have to go through and figure out what you're going to do about it and monitor that, because that takes time. You have to get somebody to approve the patch, get the patch, and implement the patch, test the patch, and all that. So these are the kinds of solutions to deal with that. And that's the green line on the bottom there. We think that companies need to have one that's specifically designed for a package for ICS. Today, most people are using, most companies, that's on the blue line, is really saying, yeah, we have signature management. You know, like, I don't want to again say companies, but example, a McAfee e-policy manager. They have that. Everybody seems to have that. What they don't have, and some of them, less of them, have SIMs to monitor, to collect data about what does go on. But the cybersecurity management's at the bottom, and we just hope that that starts to grow more, because we think it's a very important thing. But anyhow, that's the growth. It's only about 10% now, but I think it's going to grow fast in a few years. And then this was just a slide with respect to the kind of features that people are looking for in cybersecurity management. What do they need? The top part, the biggest part, has to do with things like building inventories. I think everybody finds asset inventories is a big, big issue. Everybody has problems with it. Everybody wants a tool to help them manage that and collect it, get it, and maintain it. Another one is this vulnerability matching, and then things like managing backups, managing workflows, and things like that. One other technology we checked is another one that's a little not pet peeve, but an issue for us, is secure remote access. You know, we still see a lot of companies out there that are saying, oh, we'll ask them, what are you using secure remote access? They'll say, yeah, and I'll say, what kind? They'll say, oh, well, we use VPN. Those are the top two there, okay? VPN and a traditional IT type of remote management tool. Now, both of those have weaknesses, I think, and particularly for a plant. You know, I mean, VPN will protect the messages going in, but you really don't know what anybody did or what they're doing and things like that. The IT remote access gives somebody complete control to everything in your system, which I don't think you want to do. So at the bottom are the ones that we think, and it's something we're encouraging actually the suppliers to work more on, is developing solutions that an end user can put in one plant that then grants access to any supplier they want, but monitors everything that goes in, everything that goes on. They can cut it off. There's records of what went on for compliance and things like that. That's at the bottom, so the growth of that. Yeah, boy, this is okay. And then this was just a slide about what you need, the capabilities you need. Okay, so sorry I took so long there. And anyhow, if you...
Just a quick comment, everyone, the slides, you may want to mention that the slides are going to be available for everyone.
Yes, because I'm sure nobody could see those. Right, right. And as I mentioned, we also published a report if you're interested in that. You can talk to Mark.